Good morning. This is September 1st, and this is a discussion of Joe Haldeman's famous novel, Forever War. And so if he joins us later, we will be very happy. But in any case, we are going to discuss and forge ahead with the Forever War. I want to read just what William Gibson said about this novel. To say that the Forever War is the best science fiction war novel ever written is to damn it with faint praise. It is, for all its techno-extrapolative brilliance, as fine and woundingly genuine a war story as any I've ever read. So this is what we are going to take up with, and now I will move on to our introduction. Well, we did introductions of ourselves, so we will go into the discussion. I think for this morning, I may change this. We will have Greg Evans and Alice Wittenberg, or Alice Wittenberg and Greg Evans, do a mini presentation on the Forever War, because they have actually seen it done as a play at the Organic Theater in Chicago. So with that, I will stop our screen share and I will turn it over to Alice Wittenberg and Greg to tell us their many experiences with the Forever War, and then we'll break out into a bigger discussion. Go for it. Oops.
Well, we saw that play 40 years ago, and I'm not absolutely sure that's something that we could productively tell you about.
Well, I could probably start a little bit with that as a basis because I read the webpage that was somebody a very nice webpage where they tried to reconstruct theater play from, because it's like there was supposed to be a film made out of it, and it's not, that didn't quite come on a PBS because they had done like Ursula Le Guin and so on, and this is kind of like then there are the cutbacks from the Reagan administration coming into power, and so this was kind of like a truncated version of what was actually supposed to be a PBS film essentially. And the film, the play took like the last third of the novel, so the Mary, the woman isn't in it because she's already
Gay.
Mary Gay isn't in it. That character doesn't figure into it. It's a very it was interesting because the review that we saw at that time, the Chicago Reader, said that didn't like it because it said that it was too humorous, it was too ironic, war was too serious of a thing. And when I read the review, I sort of thought, well, that's it seemed like a very well written review, and I was almost inclined not to see it. I went to see it and realized that the humor is very ironic, very dark humor, and so on, and it was effective. But I think that the play, as I recall it from 40 years ago, and sort of reviewing the pictures and everything, I think it did what in essence what the novel, of course, could do with its length and everything. And that was just described, it's a forever war. It just keeps going. And there's one thing, and I don't know if anybody knows this or not, but there's the phrase, the forever wars, or Afghanistan or Iraq. I don't know if that comes from Haldeman's novel, if that term sort of originated there, or that he took it from someplace. You would probably know, unfortunately, here, but still. And I suppose that the play communicated in a way, as I recall, just this sort of endlessly repeating cycle of war. And really, in some ways, that's what the novel never actually says that, except maybe towards the end explicitly. People just seem to go about it, going through different times, periods, thanks to time dilation, so on. But it's just, it is truly a forever war. That's what that's what the title is. And I think the novel very effectively communicates it. And I think it's entirely applicable to our current situation and our current, country and everything. It's lost none of its applicability to that. So, Laura.
Are you open to questions from people as you give your mini presentation?
Well, yeah.
This entirely improvised mini presentation. We welcome questions. We welcome questions.
Please ask questions.
Yeah, if you want to.
Well, does anyone have a question before I say something about the novel? Because, it is a hard science fiction novel. It surprises me to what extent it is. Did Jim have a question? I thought
actually it was just a comment, and what I was reflecting on was George Orwell's 1984. And if you remember in that novel, that country was also always at war, and sometimes it
Yes.
was with Oceania, and sometimes
Mhm.
it was with the other country, but
Yeah.
it was always at war. And I think Greg touched a little bit on it. That's what the military industrial complex in this country, that's their objective, is to have endless war so that they can sell an endless amount of missiles and bombs and munitions. So
Yes, absolutely.
yeah.
Well, and I think that
And Haldeman does mention
Yeah.
that toward the end of the novel.
well, and we might say that 1984 was a sort of a near future science fiction kind of thing. Well, the Forever War is that Forever War because of the time dilation effects of which is brilliantly handled actually, of the in the novel, so that people getting near light speed, of course, time for them is slower. They age slower and so on than the people back on the home planets and so on. So anyway, basically this one soldier, although he only ages maybe 10 years or so in the course of the novel, over 1,000 years happen. That forever war we see it for since just to let you know, for 1,000 year period. It just keeps on going on and on and on. So it's what you're yeah, I remember what you're saying about 1984. So Haldeman took Orwell and raised him 1,000 or
Mhm.
500 or so, however many.
Yes. But Haldeman had a degree in physics, and he understood some things a lot better than some science fiction writers do. And he also was a Vietnam War veteran.
Mhm.
And so he understood war. Gloria?
Could I just inject? It says here in the back he won a Purple Heart. Not only was he a
Yeah.
veteran, but he did win
Yeah.
a Purple
Yes.
Heart. So he
So he was-
understood being
He
injured
was
in
wounded,
war as
yes.
well.
And so the science is very well portrayed, what it would be like to try to train as a soldier on, I don't know if it's a planet, or I think it's a small planet, which is so cold that various gases are solids, and how to keep your footing if you're stepping on liquid nitrogen that's a solid. And that's very well portrayed. And because he doesn't use wormholes or any of those devices, they have ships that travel at like 0.9 something the speed of light. So they have to accelerate to that and then get, to a certain part of the voyage, and then they begin to decelerate. And so these people are spending long periods of time near the speed of light, which, remember Einstein, that would make them stay the same age, while people on Earth would, age considerably. So the science is well presented, and the warfare is well presented. People lose limbs, people are killed horribly. The enemy is not well understood. And in fact, in the beginning, they don't even know what the enemy looks like. And so all of these things are very effective and very well portrayed. Jim?
Can you tell us a little bit about who are the warring factions? Are they planets warring, or are they federations like we see on Star Trek?
No, there's no federations. How many spoilers do you want? How many spoilers are you comfortable with?
I don't care.
Because
I might not
I
read
would
it.
I would really have to spoil the ending a little bit. But there is one species that are the Taurans, because they're in the constellation Taurus. I'm not sure exactly why they're the Taurans. And then there's the other species, the Terrans, that's us. And there's some accidental lack of communication, and they think they're being belligerent toward each other when it was really kind of a lack of communication. And so
Well, and there's
they have
always
to learn to fight each other.
and how does this sound? Does it sound familiar to anybody? There's like a war lobby of soldiers and armaments makers and everything that has an interest in sort of having this war, and so somehow a misunderstanding or an incomprehension between two very alien species somehow magically turns into this forever war.
Yes. Which Haldeman takes great pains to explain is beneficial for planet Earth
Mhm.
because of the armaments
Or-
dealers and
That segment of the
yes,
planet Earth,
that
yeah.
segment. Gloria, did you have something
Oh.
to say?
Well, maybe I'll hold this because it's more about Haldeman. So just go
Yeah.
ahead.
Okay. So, yes, the aspects of war that are presented in the novel are beautifully and effectively presented. We understand the horrors of this and that it would apply to the war in Vietnam or the Peloponnesian War just as much as it applies to this high-tech war in outer space. The outrages that are, forced upon these soldiers, the things they have to do, the inadequate training that they receive, even though, of course, they're an elite group of people who have to be scientists as well as extremely physically fit. Nonetheless, they have to endure horrible things. And
Yeah,
Gloria?
there's also a fatalistic component
Yes,
because the war gets normalized. They're not questioning over this 1,000-year period, most of which, of course, they're sort of in a kind of they're in a kind of stasis. They're not living that 1,000 years, but those periods they're living, they kind of they accept it. It's normal. That's the other thing that this eternal war is kind of normalized.
yes, Gloria?
I'm going to try not to make this an Amy Goodman 1-page long question with 5 parts to it.
She does that, doesn't she?
But yes, she does.
She
All
asks the
it's very-
question based on the answer that she wants to
But
get.
she goes on and then it has
She
sub
does.
anyway, but I'm trying to, how do I boil this down? The thing about homosexuality and the military is very prominent in this book. And this is long before it wasn't in the press at all at that time. There weren't all the connections that we have. And the idea that homosexuality is not always a positive thing in the sense of it will make us more peaceful, but in fact, there is a long tradition of the homosexual thread within militaristic thinking. And if you think of the Greeks, the Spartan warriors, and many of them it was part of their accepted behaviors that they would have, maybe more explicitly than ever in the other later European militaries, that they would have these male bondings and intimacies with their fellow males. And so how do you think, well, this is going to turn into Amy Goodman, I'm sorry. How do you think the novel was received then? Do you think people just skipped that part of it? And how do you see it as being relevant now? Done.
Well, the gay rights movement was already moving forward in the 1970s. I mean, I was on the left. I belonged to various groups. There were gay caucuses. We were talking about,
But all
gay rights
positive.
and gay
This novel
liberation.
brings up the negative.
Yes.
That they would
Well,
have not
yes,
welcomed that.
that's true. I did study the so-called classics, and I remember reading that in particular about the Greek army because they might fight harder to protect their comrades if they also had some kind of more intense bond with their comrades. I don't know exactly what the reasoning was, but I do think that Haldeman is evolving because part of this novel is about the war itself. And we see this, especially the viewpoint character being transported to the war zone time after time to fight in the war. But the other part of the novel is what Earth is like each time he goes back, at which point hundreds of years may have elapsed. He goes back to Earth and sees how things have evolved. And 2 things are happening. One is that homosexual relationships become more the norm than heterosexual relationships, not just among the fighting forces, but on Earth as well. And also, eventually it arrives at the point where cloning is the way that human beings make new members of their species. They no longer mate and, breed. They clone themselves.
Mhm.
And so I think he's kind of evolving to that point. And I think that's part of the reason why he has these stages where, okay, well, you know, when the novel first starts in the 90s, heterosexuality tends to be the norm. And in fact, there is enforced heterosexual promiscuity in the fighting forces. They have to
At the
do that.
beginning.
They don't have
Yeah,
any
yeah.
choice.
The roster
Yes.
rotating different
They
partners.
have to do that because that's considered to be good for morale. But then as the society on Earth changes and evolves, heterosexuality diminishes, homosexuality increases, and then
And it's
many of the
partially
people
offered,
in the service are gay.
and it's partially offered, I think, at some point through that. At one point, that's offered up as sort of a population control. Because, of course, we talk about the 1970s. This is the aftermath of what Ehrlich's the population bomb, and so on. So Haldeman's reflecting a little bit of that, and the idea is to keep the population of the Earth to 1 billion, which seems
Yeah, really.
optimistic these days.
It does seem optimistic,
but
and yet they succeed.
But they
because
succeed.
of that.
And that was partially through that's one reason homosexuality was actually encouraged at that point. So in the novel. So.
And then eventually, human beings stop, you know, reproduce, and they stop, you know, female human beings stop carrying infants, and they just clone. And I suppose they have some sort of artificial, I think I remember they have some sort of artificial womb or whatever, and then they begin to clone other members of the species.
But
that's what happens at the end of the novel.
That's another interesting element about the novel, you know, that gave it a complexity beyond just sort of the war theme. Was, you know, after they got done with the military expedition, they come back to the Earth. Look, as the time dilation effect, you know, they may have aged a year, 2 years, and the Earth is 150 years. So each time, I don't know if anybody has read Stanislav Lem's Return from the Stars. That's a novel in which Lim has such a, in this case, it's just a single crew that goes off space exploration at near the speed of light, comes back 100 years later, and there's just sort of culture shock because the planet's changed so much. Well, this is sort of like a repeated, but it's like a part of the culture because there's always ships coming back. There's always coming up from different times, different eras. There's a technological gap too, because of course, also with the enemy, they don't know when they're facing a ship, whether that ship just launched and has the newest technology that's going to be superior to theirs, or they don't know if that ship launched 100 by their standards. They launched more recently. So it's always this matrix.
Yes.
Laura?
Yeah, well, you're speaking on Nesvadba, and he had a story like that, didn't he? About the woman who stayed home and her husband went off to the stars, and how oddly it turned out that she was the hero. Because do you remember? I can't think of the name of it. I'll have to put it in the chat. I can go get
Yeah, in the chat. I'll get up.
I'd like to read that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a short story from The Lost Face. I'll be back. And
Okay. Should we talk amongst ourselves?
Well, it's just that was, Jim?
I bet Jim has a
Well,
question.
I was going to mention, I mean, Del Gordon mentioned a really good war science fiction novel, which is Heinlein's Starship Troopers. And I found that fascinating because the warring, the element that the Earth was warring against was insectoid.
That's right, yeah.
And I thought that the movie was much better than the novel, that seemed to go into great detail about how the army was organized, and kind of I thought that it kind of dragged the novel, but
it seemed gung-ho in favor of war to me.
Interesting, but yeah, the people writing like the introduction to this edition of the Forever War put it in terms of that the Forever War is sort of it's the opposite, it's the other side. It's they're considered to be sort of yin and yang or polar opposites. They're the twin. You're gonna talk about classical war, hard science fiction about on the theme of war. They're kind of like the yin and yang of that. There's the polar opposites that are held up as being the sort of classical models of each one. This one anti-war, the Heinlein, pro-war, basically.
Oh,
That's, I don't know if that makes. I've may have read Starship. I don't know if I've either seen the film or read the novel, but
Starship Troopers?
we saw the film.
We saw the film,
Saw the
yeah.
film. I may
Yeah.
have read the. I think I read the novel. You know, 1970s. I don't remember. It didn't make much of an impact
And
on
I
me.
like insects, so I found Starship Troopers to be doubly horrible.
Oh, here we got a comment from Margot. Yeah, there's also
Oh,
Paul
yeah.
Anderson.
Tau Zero.
Ah,
Huh,
that'd be
cool.
worth for you. Yeah.
I
Gloria.
think I found the story by Nesvod, but I think it might
Oh,
be
cool.
the second voyage of Captain Nemo.
Okay.
Huh.
I don't know
Oh,
if you
I'd like to
have
read
that.
that.
I only have it in Czech, and so I'm guessing because my Czech isn't that good, and I have to go back and read it again, and at least, but I don't have time to do that here. But I think that's the story where
I'll take a look at it.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
the husband goes away and he's gone for a long time, and his wife just was a little homebody, and they had a child with special needs, and he turned out to be the greatest composer on the planet, and so the wife
Oh.
was venerated as the mother, and he was forgotten because everybody was going to space. You know, what's the big deal?
Oh, cool.
Darian has their hand up.
Yeah. Hi, Darren. You have a question or comment?
Yes. I haven't read either Starship Troopers or The Forever War, but I do enjoy science fiction and have not had time to read it for a long while. But my question has to do with the enemies in each book. I believe that most, unlike Gloria, most people have a dislike, if not an active fear and animosity toward insects. So it's easy to have insectoid enemies be ruthlessly killed and no one gives a second thought to it. I don't know about the specifics of the enemies in the Forever Wars, but I just wondered about the aspect of the enemies, and in the Forever Wars in particular, is there any sympathy or understanding of the enemies eventually, or does it continue with this misunderstanding?
Well, you know what? That's a really good question, and it's something that Haldeman takes pains to address, because throughout, well, in the beginning, when humans are first fighting with these extraterrestrials, they don't even know what these creatures look like, and they have the military has a way of doing hypnotic suggestion, where they show these horrible films of these extraterrestrials raping women and looting and killing, and they're placing a post-hypnotic suggestion: when you get there, kill, kill, kill. But they don't even know what they look like. And then over time, they learn what these creatures look like. They're not even really humanoid. They have a vaguely human shape, but they're still considered to be disgusting, and nobody would want to touch one or be anywhere near one. But in the end of the novel, and this is a spoiler, but y'all have said you don't care, in the end of the novel, we find that when human beings are finally cloning themselves, they learn that these creatures also clone themselves. And they have a kind of collective mentality, which human beings come to share when they are clones. And then that's when humans realize it was just a misunderstanding.
Oh,
The extraterrestrials had different ways of thinking than the humans did. And then they come to a kind of peace. And I thought perhaps this was Haldeman's way of reflecting on the difference between the warring factions in the war in Vietnam, the capitalist West with its individualistic orientation, and the communist East with its more collective orientation. He didn't say that, but that's what I came to think. And as for Starship Troopers, I did not read the Heinlein novel, but I saw the film, in which, yes, the insectivorous creatures were portrayed as horrible, horrible, horrible as possible, and smashing them was, spewing them all over splattering them was a wonderful thing. But yeah, even so, it was wanton destruction. Gloria.
Could I ask a question? I hope Bob will say something here, because every time that film is brought up, he goes into how Starship Troopers was changed from the novel, which was slightly more ambiguous about the value of war. Bob, you want to say something?
Well, I read Starship Troopers, oh boy, 1964. I don't remember very much about it, but I seem to remember that at the end of the book, the protagonist actually begins to understand that the wars that he'd been fighting were unjustified. So there's a turnaround in the book, which may or may not actually occur in the movie, probably not.
No, it didn't.
And we're going to have a future speaker who has published in fantasy and science fiction a wonderful story called As Blue as Blood, in which, and I hope I'm not, well, nobody cares about spoilers. This wonderful story, and her name is, I forget her first name. It's something Cypus is her last name. Well, Ms. Cypus. It's a family of anthropologists who go to another planet where they have sort of crustacean-like things that have blue blood, but in some ways they can actually share modified. They're ahead of us in technology, and they can share their blood with humans after they modify it. However, then you have some of their blood in you, and they hate the color blue because it's something to do with their eyesight and the way they're constructed. But it's a wonderful story, and it goes through some of this about how the things that are disgusting to them, including the color blue on that planet, are okay on Earth, and how we see them as crustaceans and they think we're weird. So hopefully that will be a very interesting presentation by, I think her name is Laura Cypus, but I'll have to go look.
What do you want to say about with the Forever War on that theme there? Margot's point or question there was showing some of the sophistication in Haldeman's thinking. There was a part, excuse me, there was a part where the pre-hypnotic suggestion that Alice was talking about, that because of course the protagonist, the protagonist is a scientist, and of course he realizes how that I don't know, these insect-like creatures are raping Earth women and so on. He realizes how just stupid that is as he's sort of undergoing this training, and they're feeding these images into him, and yet it still impacted him. He knew it was ridiculous, and yet when he started to think about this alien species, they didn't even know what it looked like at that point. Still, it's sort of anger. He sort of got angry. He sort of got, and he realized he even realized what was happening. But he's post-hypnotic. Thank you. And he realized what was the effect that was on him, but it was having that effect on him. And I thought that was an effective passage in the book.
It was. And Jim had something to say.
I just want to mention another good science fiction war. It wasn't a novel, it was a movie called Enemy Mine. Did anybody see that? Lou Gossett Jr. Yes. And I don't remember who the other, because there was only two characters in the movie. They were fighter pilots that were engaged in a skirmish, and they both crashed, and they were marooned together, if you remember. And it was slowly the process of them coming to understand each other. And it was the same situation that, you're talking about with that, basically brainwashing by the army. They were told that each one they were savages, that they were the aggressor and all that. And here, if you remember, towards the end of the movie, Lou Gossett, and you're talking about reproduction too. This was asexual reproduction that Lou Gossett sort of like had this egg inside of him, right? And he bears a baby and dies. But it's an excellent, I think it's another excellent science fiction piece. I don't know if there was a novel that it was based on or not, but the movie certainly is substantial, by itself. Oh, there you go.
Oh, yeah.
Laura, you found it. Dennis Quaid. Yes, right. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that does sound good.
The Man with the Wide Smile.
Oh, yeah.
And the movie was based on the short story, and then he wrote a novelization, which is much better than the movie because it kept all the original themes, which the movie left out. Most of them. They made the humans totally evil with the pirates. That wasn't in the original novel. And he wrote it based upon the movie Hell in the Pacific, which was also the same situation of two opponents trapped on an island.
Yeah. Wow.
Very cool. So
Yes.
you said that it was a short story originally called The Man with the Wide Smile?
No. Dennis Quaid was just a man with a wide smile.
Okay.
Short
That's
story
what
was
he.
still
Oh, right.
Enemy Mine,
I see. Oh, okay. And
but
who?
the short story started on the beach, where that's where the movie Hell in the Pacific started, on the beach.
Oh, okay.
That's where he got the original idea, improved on it. But when he did the novelization, it's clear that there are good humans and bad humans, where the movie simplifies it by just making the humans bad.
Yeah. Yes.
I didn't remember that Dennis Quaid was portrayed and as the bad.
No, he's the good. Because he's living with the enemy, knowing him, and then raising the child. That was the main point there. But they didn't go into the fact that he had, in the novelization, he had to go to the Drac planet to find the child again. And they were trying to brainwash the child because they couldn't understand why he loved humans. They were trying to normalize the child back into the normal Drac society. And Dennis Quaid here, raising the child, knowing the family history. That was one point in the novelization, is that he memorized something of 13 generations of Drac. And he sat there reading it off to the grandfather before the grandfather finally believed that, hey, this guy is not an enemy.
That sounds excellent. I've got to read the novelization because it makes the movie so much richer.
Yes.
So
That
William,
is normal for movies taken from novels. It's normal that they cut out 3/5 of the plot.
Bill, I'm trying to get some coherent notes in the chat. So the original Hell in the Pacific was a novel and it was about World War II, or was it science fiction?
It was, I don't think it was novel. It was a movie.
And it was about human, it was non-science fiction.
Non-science fiction.
Okay.
I think Lee
So it was a
Marvin
film.
and Toshiro
Okay.
Mifune. Trapped on an island. It starts out capturing each other. They try to stay alive. And of course, it takes the easy way out at the end by they both get bombed by the same bomber. And nobody survives.
Well,
But it's very cool that, I mean, you're enlightening us about the background of that movie, and it's so cool that they took that story and basically expanded it to that situation in science fiction to have those two very unlike creatures stranded together. That's excellent.
It's the generation of the story. It's like David Brin would never have written The Postman except for reading about the postman in The Mountain's God's Eye. He takes one idea and expands it into his own story.
Does anyone see also a connection with that Twilight Zone episode?
I was thinking of that.
Yeah, the one where the man was so proud of his samurai sword and he hated the Japanese so much, and then something, I think it's a black box, I don't think it was scientific, turns him into that enemy. And suddenly he's Japanese. It's sort of like Japanese like me, black like me, Japanese like me.
The
And
Twilight Zone had
Bob-
so many anti-war
Yes, yeah.
episodes.
yeah. We'll
Well,
try to
Rod's-
get that
Rod's
title.
right,
Maybe
so-
Bob knows the title of that episode, if we can do it before we close off the chat.
I was actually thinking of another Twilight Zone episode where they started the scene with a human who was being tortured by an alien of some kind, and he's being interrogated, and he doesn't know what he's anything about what he's asking, and can't understand why he keeps torturing him. And at the end, the aliens say, "Hey, we got to stop this. Do anybody remember this? That we got to
No.
stop this." And the human army guy comes out and says, "Well, yeah, hey, you said that you would help us to develop this training for a war in which a human would be captured and then interrogated, but now you're backing out of it." I mean, so it turned out it was
Yeah, I remember
it was
that a
all
little bit.
I don't
fabricated.
remember that.
Yeah.
That was an
Well,
Outer
remember-
Limits episode.
Oh, was it?
Oh,
Wow.
okay.
Is Outer
That sounds
Limits?
good,
Okay.
though. Sounds good.
Yeah,
Wow.
it was.
Do you think, here's another question. Do you think I'd have to look up the Milgram experiment about shocking people and when you would quit? That sounds very parallel to that Milgram experiment, that the aliens were more understanding and
Yeah.
empathetic than the humans. And also, I just read, because I have this series of rat cartoons I'm doing, but that rats are more likely not to allow torturing of a fellow rat than humans are likely to allow torturing, or they would actually give up a food pellet, rather than see the choices. Here, you can have a food pellet if you will press the button to and they won't do it because they see it's going to hurt the rat.
Wow. Yeah, rats are nice. I like rats.
I just thought the Chris's thing about George Takei, and I think if we're going to bring Star Trek into it, the original Star Trek series, of course, on the theme. How about the Day of the Dove? Forever War.
Mhm.
Do you remember
Tell us,
the
remind
third,
us.
third season, Day of the Dove? They take a group of Klingon prisoners aboard the ship, and then there's this energy force, this science fantasy
Sparkly
force, that
thing.
sparkling thing, and it feeds off of hate, but it can also change it. It helps the Klingon prisoners get free from their incarceration, gets them weapons, and then a fight sort of breaks out aboard the Enterprise between the crew and these Klingon prisoners, and Kirk and Spock are noticing how much the hatred there is in the crew members for the Klingons, and exaggerations of the barbarities that the Klingons unleash upon prisoners. And they're saying, well, why are you talking like this? But they themselves start to feel a little bit, and it's this energy force that's sort of feeds off of hate. And finally, the Kirk and the Klingons sort of come together and realize what's going on, and they make a truce, and they essentially laugh the energy force off the ship, because they sort of come to an agreement I think even the Klingons said, we fight our own battles, we don't fight this creature's battles, and so on. So
Yeah,
there's
best Star Trek ever.
maybe the best third season episode, but one of the best.
Day of the Dove, it's called.
Day of the Dove.
Mhm.
Yeah, as
That
again,
one,
the title
Get that
itself
in the
says.
chat.
Yeah,
I gotta
I'm gonna
look for
write
that.
that in the chat too.
yeah.
If you want to write it, just give a brief synopsis of it, because I can't put it that briefly.
Okay.
I think
Red
you did a
War.
good job explaining it. A couple lines there in the chat, because people can save the chat and then
Yeah.
they'll have all this information.
Well, in
Um,
fact, the Klingons later on joined the Federation, don't they? Because we
Yes,
had the
they do.
character of Worf. I don't remember which one, if that was Voyager
Worf is in
or
Next Generation and
Next.
he's in Deep
Okay,
Space Nine.
right, Worf. And do you remember that bit where somebody asked Worf, how come you guys look like this now? Because he just had a wrinkled forehead, and the earlier.
That was when they were doing a remake.
Yeah.
They're sort of doing a Trouble with the Triples, weren't they? Sort of having where they
Uh,
had gone back to the previous series, and they were I remember
That's
that.
right.
And he just said, "Oh, it's some terrible thing. I can't describe it." Or something horrible.
We don't talk about it.
Yeah, we don't
Yes.
talk about
It
it.
is something we do not wish to discuss.
Right.
Oh, Lord.
So funny.
Anyway,
I have
I
a
don't have
question.
anything else to say.
I do have a question.
Okay.
Now, there's a vast literature of military fiction. And now we're getting into that there's quite, and actually most of the writers of science fiction are still male. And now there's this big crossover that sometimes they'll actually take works and adapt them over to science fiction. But what would you say, the relationship is between these two genres, or maybe the ratio of difference between regular military? I mean, because otherwise it's just substitute. But is there some added value to making it science fiction? There's my question.
I don't really know the answer to that. I mean, I'll just say this is something that you did not ask, but I find that a lot of people are either Star Wars people or Star Trek people, and I'm a Star Trek person because Star Wars is about, as the title implies, war. And there's
Right.
always a whole lot of war going on there. And I don't know, in some ways, I think that science fiction can be used to ramp up interest in and a desire for war. It can be used for any purposes, just like any other form of art.
I think it gave a
And
new boost to people who were anti-science fiction anyway, who never even read Asimov and some of the real thoughtful ones. But once that I hated that movie the minute I heard the title, and I knew what it was going to do. And I don't care that it was the good guys who win over the bad, because it's just that binary thinking of semantics, where everything's a buzzword, everything's an either or, and that film abounds in either ors. Whereas Star Trek was often trying to, break some of these buzzwords that go right past your temporal lobe into your fight or flight amygdala.
Yes. Yeah, in Star Trek, different species are trying to get to know each other and communicate with each other. That is, at least in the earlier Star Trek.
Earlier ones. It got kind of soap opera-y as it went on.
But it's a good question. Sorry.
I think Star Wars has a bit of redeeming value because it's a matter that there is this fascistic force, this fascistic government, if you will, that is trying to take over the universe. That's the Empire.
Well, I would answer that immediately, because I don't let these things go unanswered. We always project the other as being a hive mind, and we're the total individuals. I want to give you a statement from a visitor from Sweden, and he was laughing. He said, the funny thing about visiting here, is a pre-med student, friend of my late husband. He said, you Americans, you go on and on all the time of being so individual, and you're all alike.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jim, it's very funny, because I think that movie was a multi-million-dollar statement of that myth, that we're total individuals here. All of these products we have so many choices between products. It totally, rhetorically, we are so worked on, and I think I was reborn when I majored in rhetoric, to the point where we are no more individual, whatever that means, than any hive mind that we situate elsewhere and put the label, which is a buzzword, fascism on. And what Star Wars did for Reagan, the fact that he could then key into that Hollywood film, he was an old Hollywood guy and he understood the power of film, and then use that for that terrible, that wouldn't even work, strategic defense Star War initiative that killed off the good work he and Gorbachev had been doing. That is what shut down a lot of the good work he and Gorbachev had been doing. And it played on that title, Star Wars. And it was everywhere in the media, and the big popular following of the film series, were influenced by that. And that, this is like Star Wars. It's going to protect us. It will be deterrence that no hive mind fascists over there can get through. So I would say you have to be very careful about liking Star Wars because it completely is black and white. You know, the white things and the black things and the
Well, you know, there are 6 movies in that series. I think 6.
well, I'm sure they
And-
got better as time went on, but
And
that was pretty stark.
it is very moralistic. And Darth Vader is definitely an evil character. He is the dominating protagonist in the you know, in the stories, and he was a good guy who got hurt and was lured over by this very other evil person
I think
to
use
to
of
the
the word
dark
evil.
side.
Use of the word evil is what is really putting me off now. Because again, evil is often used as a buzzword. And, you know, if we could unpack some of these things, then part of the redeeming quality of Star Wars was that he was the protagonist's father. And, but it's a very militaristic formula that you made the wrong choice. You went with them, the other, and we know we have the good value.
Well,
There is no challenge to that.
They did some bad things with the Death Star. I mean, they blew up this innocent planet. I mean, you know, for instance, they were definitely, and it wasn't just, you know, one person. It wasn't just Darth Vader. He was a very powerful element in this in the Empire. Again, you know, we have the Empire, you know, opposed to the Alliance, and the Alliance is the
Alliance is NATO, and the Empire is the Russians.
no,
pretty
no,
much.
it's not depicted that way.
No,
It's not. The
not
Alliance,
quite,
you
not
think Princess
quite.
Leia, and then you
Yeah.
know, you also have Jar
No,
Jar Binks and that
no,
planet,
no,
those
no,
types.
no, and everything gets solved with weaponry. And,
Yeah.
well, there's too much baggage there for many of us who are more into really trying to get beyond the military solutions to everything. And that gave such a power to 1930s pulp fiction. I cannot tell you. I mean, all the work that the people like Roddenberry and some of the more thoughtful science fiction writers, it was sent into the toilet because of that film. And that is the film other, you know, 2001 was much better than Star Wars, but people don't even know the name. And yet Star Wars is still with us. It's a franchise. It's a brand.
Yeah.
We're all individuals here, Jim.
They have The Mandalorian is a very popular series right now. And I will say that I think on balance, Star Wars is a very positive, you know, story of people who are, there's diversity, and they're fighting against this monolithic,
monolithic enemies
militaristic,
are what propaganda is based on, Jim. Come on, monolithic enemies.
Well, I think we can be a little more civil. I'm not trying to.
I am so anti that film and its whole franchise because of how Reagan used it to undo what he and Gorbachev had been setting up, which was to wind down, you know, nuclear stockpiles. And that film was somebody who was his advisor, who knew rhetoric and who knew the power of rhetoric to use that title that was already a franchise and a brand to totally sink the winding down of the nuclear stockpiles. And when that came out, I nearly went into a year of, I don't know, a nervous breakdown, whatever, because I saw what little that was going in the good way was being undermined by the film and by Reagan's use of Star Wars strategic defense, which doesn't work, by the way, Jim.
But that was not what was in the film. That was the way the film was distorted by the Reagan administration. Other aspects of the film were very mythic, and many people were interested in the hero's journey and the human relationships. It was no more warlike than 90% of the films that are out there.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, the fact is that it was a perfect vehicle for killing off the work that had been done. And because of that, and keeping that franchise, as we call it now, everything's got a commercial name in our very individualist society. That franchise is with us. Films like 2001, people haven't heard of. they haven't heard of Fahrenheit 451 unless some schools may still have them read it, but a lot of schools are banning it. But Star Wars, we can have morning, noon, and night because it has the word war in it. Don't underestimate the power of semantics and the fact that this is a buzzword and it became a buzzword decades ago. And people aren't going to think of all the nice nuances about it. It is Star Wars. Now we have the Space Force, which is like Star Wars, taking it out to space.
You haven't seen any of them, Gloria? None of them? Six or seven films?
I am studying the words, the semantics of how words get to be buzzwords.
Let's say, before you opine on that whole set
That's
of
semantics. No, you're
films
talking
that
about the films
you might want
themselves.
to
I'm talking
might
about
want to
how
see
the
some of them.
terms are used. Can you listen to what I'm saying? This is how the words are used. The term Star Wars, that some people had seen it, some people hadn't. They had an iconic image of it when this was in the 80s when
Well,
Reagan used it,
I could
before
get-
all these nice nuanced. And remember that they're very commercial. They are making big money under the title of a war, Star Wars. Well, at least Forever Wars doesn't sound attractive, but Star Wars can be, it can be the way of the future. And there is an equivalent group, and I study, various other science fictions, not just ours, but I've had a speaker here on Chinese science fiction, and the Russians have their equivalent military science fiction. And they do exactly the same thing in a very individualistic way, just as we are individuals. They have their Star Wars, and they go out in nuanced ways to other planets. And it gets more nuanced, yes, as time goes on, but it's basically a male construct. It's basically a military society. And things can be solved by judicious use of warfare against monolithic fascists, who in their view are us.
I think that I had a certain experience with Star Wars because I don't think I saw them when it first came out in 76. I started seeing in the late 70s. I saw all three films during the 1980s. And I mean, I was sort of okay with them because don't forget, even during the initial stages, we invaded Grenada, but still coming out of the Jimmy Carter years, when it seemed like the United States wasn't necessarily going to be, an evil empire for again. And even into the Reagan years, it was possible to pretend like this is sort of an aberration or something. I think for me, it became really apparent that something was going wrong in the Gulf War '91. The whole way we were talking, it was obvious that Vietnam had been overcome. We were moving a different direction. It was interesting because I saw, I guess it was the second Star Wars film again on TV as Alice and I were marching in the anti-war demonstrations, and I'd liked it during the '80s because I think I was picking up on there were nuances in it and everything. And there's and I was a very conscious political activist during that time, but I didn't. I was picking up some of the nuances that Jim is talking about and everything. But when I saw it suddenly, some of the action sequences that I just sort of, taken as being sort of warlike, but not that harmful or that problematic. I mean, I couldn't watch it was the point. Once we got to the lead up into the Iraq War, the first Iraq War, the first Persian Gulf War, suddenly the scenario had changed. And then I really couldn't appreciate the nuances.
This is an important point you're bringing up. I hate to cut you down, but before we forget, in rhetoric, this is an important point. It's called kairos or timeliness. The same object like speech or film that is read one way at one time can be totally read a different way. And most people who are not in rhetoric don't realize that. And they don't realize that the same thing in one rhetorical situation means something different than it means in a different rhetorical situation. And the Star Wars is not the same thing in one time. It is, the reception is different. What's going on in the rhetorical media, what are the wars, what are the conflicts of that time? Give this object, it's like you're shining a blue light on it in one decade, you're shining an orange light on it in another decade. And that's what rhetoric studies. That's why I was limiting it to the words and how they were used in various periods. And people were exposed to it to various degrees. I did see Star Wars, but I think I only saw one of the later ones.
I do want to say one more thing. We saw there was Yanis Varoufakis, the Greek finance minister, very
yes, Varoufakis.
Varoufakis, yeah, very, very neat guy. He was on, it was some program called, I don't know, it was like Revolution Now or something. He was being interviewed about just sort of the world and everything. And it was these two African American guys, and they were like quite radical and everything. And they were just sort of talking along. And then somebody said something about Star Wars or something. And then suddenly Varoufakis he launched into a thing. Oh my God, Star Wars. No, that's basically Rome with a few medieval add-ons to it. But then the guy, the Revolution Now guys, I mean, or whatever the channel was called, they're saying, oh no, Star Wars is, they started to actually get into it, and then they agreed that, oh well, we'll talk about it. They might have a special program in which they discuss the Star Wars versus Star Trek, the Star Trek, because Varoufakis was holding up Star Trek as the ideal. So they're going to have a Star Trek versus Star Wars debate.
Gloria, that could be something that this group could do
Yeah.
at
We could
some
do
point
that.
in the future.
And also, but I think the third dimension, it's like in the time machine, there are 3 dimensions, height, the other one is kairos, the rhetorical situation, or you would say historical era, if you're not just focusing on rhetoric. Because again, you'd have to bring that third dimension in, not just either or, either this vision of the world or that vision, but time is shifting the conditions in which you're seeing these things over
Yes.
decades. So, maybe that's the third position, is how does rhetorical or historical era affect how we take
We could
Star
have
Wars?
the debate. We could have the debate, and Jim could argue.
Maybe a
yes,
panel. I'd rather
Star
call it
Wars-
a panel.
Star
than a
Wars is
debate.
progressive, and Gloria could argue, no, Star
Well,
Wars
and
is.
no
No,
less
I'm
than
not going to be on a debate. I don't do debates. I would be on
We
a
could bring in-
panel
All right.
where you'd
We'll get
have
somebody
several
else.
points of view, not just
we could bring in
either or.
David Graeber. No less than
David Graeber.
David Graeber argued
Yes.
that the Star Trek, and not probably he wouldn't be arguing about the newer ones. They're getting into something
They're
else.
pretty awful.
But the original series through maybe Voyager, not including Enterprise, but through Voyager, that they were,
Especially Next Generation.
especially Next Generation, were kind of utopian. There was
Mhm.
he's saying they had they had military, but they didn't really follow. I mean, everybody's getting along in a certain kind of way. There's something kind of utopian-esque.
Yeah,
That's
he
what
wrote
I-
an
Okay,
essay
so
to that.
Yeah,
what
David
I would
Graeber
do
wrote
is
it
your
too.
homework is, if you're going to present these, if you're going to be taken seriously by rhetoric people, you can't do it in a monolithic, every time every era sees the same object. Every era does not see the same object.
Who was saying that?
So
Who
you
was saying
might want to note what was going on at the time of the earlier or original Star Trek and Star Wars, and then when the later ones came out, what was the rhetorical situation? We would call it the media climate then.
No, that's outside of rhetoric. There's also, of course, that's any kind of a cultural, anthropological, or even
Yeah.
Marxist
I'm just speaking from
orientation.
my own field. My
Recognize
field is rhetoric. I'm sorry. I
rhetoric,
have to go to
recognize
those.
the changing socioeconomic and so on circumstances and political circumstances affects the way that we view certain things.
But you communicate them through language and rhetoric. So that is the medium in which all of these attitudes and economic realities occur. It's through the medium of communication, which is rhetoric. So, yes, I think if we did it, it would make a better panel, because you don't want to slide into the better than, worse than, kind of dichotomies.
Well,
And-
I like that. I think that Greg is spot on, that at least in the later iterations of Star Trek, it did seem utopian. I mean, for instance, there was no money. It was very egalitarian. I mean, now there was this curious one that was called Deep Space Nine. Right, where they had a gigantic space station that was guarding the wormhole. And this was conflict too. I don't remember who the antagonist was that they were guarding against coming through the wormhole to attack the Federation, but there was a capitalist element in there too, with
Ferengi.
the
the Ferengis, with their latinum,
Platinum, you're right. Gold press.
Gold press platinum.
gold pressed latinum with heavy brows and funny ears and stuff. And then there was, the haberdasher, right? And he was
He was a
of that same
Cardassian.
race, right?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
was I don't
I
remember
always
what.
want to call them Kardashians, you know, like Kim Kardashian. I always
They're not.
call them Kardashians,
Yeah.
but they were Kardashians.
Cardassians, that's right.
Yes.
You know, that couldn't
And-
be accidental because those
I
people
know.
live in LA. That
I
can't
know,
be
you're right.
accidental.
no,
You're
Yeah.
right.
they're-
It couldn't be accidental.
The Cardassians were in Trek were very famous long before that family became known. I mean,
Yes,
I
yes.
think as a
Well,
popular sensation.
but I think
So-
they were well known around LA before
sure
they
they
became
okay, but
national
not
phenomenon.
not
I think-
nationally.
I think that they did know about them, and I think it was sort of an
Yeah.
in joke, but now we're all
No.
in on the in joke.
And it was interesting that you talk about the the Haldeman's book and the fact that later on they were cloning. Well, it's I think that in the Star Wars series they talk about the Clone Wars, and I
Mhm.
think that and there was, I don't remember which one it was, but they go to a planet where Boba Fett, they're fighting, right? I think it's Luke is fighting Boba Fett there, and he has a big fight. But there is this huge number of stormtroopers there, and it seems that every stormtrooper is a clone of Boba Fett, right?
Wow.
It's
Well,
not,
they're all monoliths. The enemy is always a monolith.
and the fact that they are clones, I think, makes it a little more palatable when you see so many stormtroopers get killed, because they're not really fully
Well, that's
formed,
the other. Other is
people.
not a full human being. When it's an other, it isn't a full human.
Yeah, I think it may be a device of
Yeah.
the George Lucas, if he's the one that's writing. I don't know who's writing these things, but
No, probably not him anymore. He probably has
Yeah.
help, I would imagine.
yeah.
Yeah,
Because you
these
always see the
are very-
stormtroopers with their helmet on, right?
These
You
are
don't
very
get-
fraught topics, cloning at the time. Now let's go back to rhetoric. At the time that Haldeman brought out the Forever Wars, cloning was just being talked about, had not happened yet, as far as I remember. And it was on the fringe, on the horizon of science. So people had not articulated all the possible uses within the military that, but it became, because it means no variation from the parent, it's another handy metaphor for totalitarian politics, because if it's a clone, it's not going to bring that wonderful individualism of, sexual reproduction. So these are topics, again, that we probably can have speakers on all of that, because I think cloning and other ways, science is being more and more suspect. And as we raise the ante about, abortion not being okay, and the only thing, and bringing back, what's that movie? They even made fun of it, the series on PBS called The Midwife, where it's, on Sundays, it's about why
I know that one.
the pro-natalist film, a pro-natalist series, where it's always, everything should be about the baby. Don't ever not have a baby. So
There was at
we're
least
not
a few.
for cloning nowadays. Let me finish.
I'm
In
sorry.
our rhetorical situation, we do not value any alternatives to sexual reproduction and the value of the baby. So this is called pro-natalist in some quarters. So this is going to be a very hot topic, the fact that it might not have been. I think it was a more liberal or whatever progressive time in the 70s when he brought in cloning. It didn't have this heavy buzzword factor that it is now. And when you say cloning, most people are, oh, technology, oh, science, oh, but that's not nature. We're in a very binary nature versus artificial versus human-made rhetorical situation now that was not as much, I think, at that period.
I have a procedural question. Do we usually, do these meetings go an hour and a half?
Yeah, about
Usually,
an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to ask about the next project that you were setting up the one with the next Bradbury. You wanted to
right.
do a and I was also curious because one of the things that attracted me to this group was that very interesting production of the what was it called? The
The
glass.
crystal egg. By
Yes,
H.G.
yes. Did you
Thank
do
you.
all of the illustrations
No,
for
that
that?
was done by a mixture of technologies. There was even, I hate to say it, a little AI used, but I didn't do most of the AI little bits. A lot of it was done right in PowerPoint because it has an animation set of functions, and we can take photographs and then manipulate them in PowerPoint. But some of it, yes, was done by DALL-E, which, I said play it down because that's another buzzword now. You don't want to tell people there was any of that.
I'm a big
So,
fan of AI and Dolly and all that
well, you're
stuff.
going to get into it with my cousins then that are
Okay,
out on the
well,
picket
let
line.
bring it on.
He's
You
he's
know,
a SAG actor, and his wife
yeah.
is the voice actor for various animateds. And
How many people were doing, speaking of that, how many people were the voice actors in that in
the
that one you
Crystal Egg,
did?
well, we
Yeah.
barely covered, and actually Margot was one of them. She did the tradesman, and I did one line because somebody didn't show up or they switched one line over to me. But I think however many characters there were, we doubled on a couple of the characters. You could do that.
Did I know that there was some pictures, they looked like they were illustrations out of an old magazine or something where you presented the characters and
Right.
they would stand, right? They weren't moving.
No, they
They
weren't
weren't
moving,
animated.
except the some of the Martians. I animated those Martians that were moving. That was my part of it. I was animating them.
They were like butterflies,
Yeah. And the
birds
one
or
that comes
something.
up, I did
Yeah.
that too. But he did the blinking. I didn't do the blinking, but other than the blinking and the merging of the two heads, he did that. But I brought that guy up, and it's just simple functions they have in PowerPoint. But our next thing, I try to keep it open to all ideas, and there's various stories out there that are in the public domain by Ray Bradbury. And it may take us a couple months to everybody bring up yours, and then we have to decide, is it stageable? Does it have too many too many scenes and too many characters, that some of them do. So that's where we're at. We're picking our next Bradbury story that is in the public domain. Now, if you want to know the next 2 months, here's the handy guide if they show up. Our speakers are S.B. Divya, who is a woman who's a physicist, I believe, and a novelist, a young woman in her 30s, who is from an Indian background, Hindu. And so she brings some of that, but is a Californian in the north part of California. And I think her latest novel is called Machinehood. And she writes about AI and machine learning and what people are mistakenly calling AI. So the next one will be Leah Cyprus, and it's As Blue as Blood. And she specializes in Jewish-based SF. And then comes Greg Evans and Alice Wittenberg presenting on Nesvadba.
No, just Greg.
Just Greg.
Yeah.
And they say Nesvadba, but we used to say Nesvadba. It's hard to undo your habits of a lifetime. So Nesvadba. So he's a Czech science fiction writer and very, very good, and no longer living. So that's October. Divya, a woman who writes about AI, who comes from an Indian background and brings some of that into her fiction. November 5th, Leah Cyprus, As Blue as Blood, the story I told you about that appeared in FNSF, whose specialty is often, but not exclusively, Jewish science fiction. And Greg Evans, okay, and Josef Nesvadba. In December, the great Czech science fiction writer in the tradition of, maybe, Karel Čapek, who invented the word robot and put it into the world's languages.
Nesvadba was also the contemporary and peer of Stanislav Lem, Boris and Arkady Strugatsky, the sort of great science fiction writers that actually wrote during communism, under communism.
Right. They got a
Oh,
lot done. And plus, we just don't know anything about Eastern Europe, let alone all these more far off places, which are now getting better known than Eastern Europe. And so it's good that we occasionally learn something about, they functioned as the puppets for our uniqueness. They were the other for so many decades. It's very hard to unlearn the things that we think we know about Eastern Europe, and many of them are myths and mistakes. So some of that will probably come out, in the talk. I've been to Czech Republic 3 times. I've been to Sweden 3 times, Germany, and I have relatives scattered around in there. And the Swedes are very interesting too. We could go off on them because, well, anyway.
So this Bradbury project would be a separate
Yeah, that's
subgroup
the
of
Planet
this.
Zoom players. Planet Zoom players.
Okay, Planet Zoom players.
Yeah,
Okay.
they're an offshoot. They started
Okay.
within this group, sort of, and I pulled a few people that were interested in it. But it's
Okay.
it's its own little autonomous theater thing going. but
Okay.
it relates to us.
I'm interested. I like puppetry, and I found that absolutely charming, the way that you had those characters,
Oh yeah.
and then you do the voiceover, and I thought it was a very effective
You should
story
get in touch
telling.
with what's his name? One of the people that's in that group, and he played Mr. Cave. John Shostek, because he worked in puppetry.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
he had what he called the
shows.
Secret Circus for many years out of Chicago. It was a group where I think they did puppets and various theatrical things. It was called Secret Circus. I think you can find it on YouTube or
Shows
and
comes
his
through.
name's Shostek. I'll spell it for you. And he's
Okay,
one of our group, and you encountered him because he played Mr. Cave.
okay.
Here.
Greg, you do the translation for Czechoslovakia, right?
Yeah, yes, I do translation from Czech into English. Yes.
Okay, where did you learn that language?
On the street in Prague.
You
I
must have
studied
lived
it,
there a long time.
many months or many years off and on for 30
Jeez.
years now. I go over there every year and so on.
Okay,
And so anyway, I translate, and I learned it not through formal study, but I've had teachers and studied myself quite seriously. So I do.
Prague. You go to
in
Prague
in
every
Yeah,
time.
Prague.
Okay.
Yes.
Prague's a cool place. I've been there 3 times, but not anything like the amount
Okay.
of time.
Yeah.
It's got a lot of alchemy, all kinds of the Emperor Rudolph II. Can you kind of describe what kind of a dude he was for
Oh.
Jim? Because most Americans don't understand that the whole influence of Rudy on Prague.
Well, just that Rudolph was he was a Habsburg emperor into the 16th, start of the 17th century, but he was believed in alchemy. He spent time with the Rabbi Lowe, the Jewish rabbi, who was also very mystical. Or, he was famous, for he'd rather spend his time in his room with his objects than dealing with affairs of state, which didn't always make things entirely good for the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but made him a hell of an interesting emperor from a point of view of art and collections and the figures, the intellectual figures that he brought around him. Tycho Brahe comes to mind. He brought
Kepler.
He brought together Kepler and Brahe and
Wow.
so on. So he just had this fascinating court. Was an interesting guy, unusual guy, and he was emperor, and for many years. And
Is there a feature film out on Rudolph made anywhere? Rudolph II.
I'm not sure that there.
It should be.
He
Should be.
should be, yeah.
Yeah.
Not sure that I remember
That's
one.
something we
Yeah.
could do. Maybe we could do it as science fiction,
Yeah,
his weirdness.
he was
Yeah,
strange.
it's a much weirder capital than most other places because of all this alchemy. They even have a street of the alchemists, and don't they in Old Town?
Oh, Gloria, the last time I was there was 2018. There are so many tourists.
Yeah,
I
global
know, they're
tourism.
ruining it. Damn
Global
it.
tourism is taking its toll
There
on
are so
some of
many
that.
Yeah.
things there,
Yeah.
and what were once cool shops with cool little things are now just
It's
full of
kitsch.
tourist
It's all
crap.
kitsch now, right? Just all
Yeah.
made
It's hard to
somewhere else.
avoid.
Yeah, It's
Well, there
really-
you have, that's the individualism of capitalism taking
Yes,
over a
yes.
magical city.
Yeah, you're right. It used to be Magic Prague. In fact,
transit.
there's that really great book. Who wrote that? Ripolini, I think
Ripolini,
his
Mario
name was.
Ripolini, yeah.
Yeah, wrote a book called Magic Prague. So if you're interested in reading about that, Jim, that's an
I would.
excellent resource. It's called Magic
write that in
Prague.
the-
I think the author's
Maybe-
last name is Ripolini.
Oh, I didn't put it in the right thing. I put John's show, I'm gonna write his name again.
Maybe if I,
Send it to
if-
Bob. He didn't need it. Let's see. And it's
Magic
go-
Prague is the name of the book,
Magic
and
yeah,
Ripolini
Prague.
might be the author's
And
last
how do
name,
you
but
spell it?
maybe Greg's trying to Rippplini. No, not
Okay,
too.
well, we could put a question.
Yeah.
well, if I go to Czechoslovakia, I'll only plan on spending a little time in Prague and maybe find some other city that's not so overrun with
Oh, try
commercialism
Brno.
and
That's
Yeah,
and
better not be
tourists.
bad. Didn't
What?
know.
How about Moravsky Krumlov?
Brno. Or
Look,
Chesky.
yeah,
Yeah,
Moravsky.
Moravsky Krumlov.
Chesky.
Moravsky Krumlov, that's where the what's his name? Alphonse Mucha, his whole collection of 30 paintings is, I think it's still there.
Interesting, yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
Slavic cycle or whatever it's called. And
Yeah.
30 huge paintings. He's the guy that did all those posters. He's an
Oh,
art
yeah,
absolutely.
Art
Yeah,
Nouveau,
of Sarah
yeah.
Bernhardt in Paris. You know
Yes.
his posters, Jim. You know the big ones of Sarah Bernhardt.
Beautiful Art
Yeah,
Nouveau.
oh, yeah, that's,
He was a Czech. He was a Czech.
oh,
He
okay.
spent most of his career doing all the Parisian posters.
Paris, yeah.
Is that
And then he went
Mocha?
back and did 30 paintings of the whole
Mucha.
cycle
Mucha.
of Slavic history. They're big. I saw them in person, by the way.
Luca.
Did you say that was Mucha?
Mucha, you'd pronounce
Oh,
it.
oh, right, yeah, I had a,
Alphonse Mucha.
I had a big poster of that in my frat room.
Everybody
when I
did
was
it
in
in
school.
1950. You
Somebody
kidding me?
looked it up. It's
Oh, there we go.
Ripolino.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
Oh,
Okay.
good job,
Typing
Dell.
as fast as I can.
Wow, thank
Yes,
you.
thank you.
Thank you.
It's very worth reading if you want to know about the
Okay,
mystique of Prague, which has been a lot of it's been covered over
Pushed,
by
yeah, covered
tourism
over.
now.
It's not totally
Right.
absent, but it's
It is getting pretty dense.
yes.
But there was a time when there were so many. Now it's been Disneyfied, is my way of describing
Yeah,
it.
that's what I call it. too.
That's-
Buildings have been
And that is my
painted
final lead in. That is exactly what Yusuf Nesfedba said to me. It's being all Disneyfied.
Yeah, yeah. He
That's
got
what he
pretty
said. That was in
depressed.
1999, and it hasn't gotten better since
He was,
then.
he was pretty depressed near the end of his
Yeah.
life, as
Yeah.
I recalled, about all the changes and, you know,
Yep.
it's one of those
Some of it-
things. So
some of it-
everything is a mixed bag. It's more,
This
it's
is
more
true.
various than anyone would imagine. Maybe that's a good way to.
Very true.
So
Well-
look for us on YouTube. I will try to get this all in the can, as they say in Hollywood, and up on YouTube. And oh, here's the thing about the Haldemans, since they didn't show up, and it probably was something they couldn't help. I said, if you want to make a little recording, we'll put it together with this one as the next video, and we'll call it part 2 after you've seen us, and you can respond to anything. you
Very
would like.
nice.
How's that?
yeah, I
Very
really
nice.
appreciate Alice and Greg stepping into the
I
void
do. Yeah, we all do.
and, carrying the ball a little bit. I learned something about that book,
And you learn
Appreciate
something
it.
about their
Yeah.
expertise, which is
Yeah.
unheard
Right.
of.
Yeah,
And you
They,
learn
they have such a knowledge of that part of the world, which
and you learn something about extemporaneous speaking. That's
That's what this was.
you carried it off really well. Yeah,
the great
Thank you.
speakers
Thank you.
have it all
Yeah.
inside. They don't need notes, because they've lived it. So that's why.
This
Well,
made for a good program, so thank you very much for the extemporaneous speaking.
Yeah.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. You're
Oh,
welcome.
you're very welcome.
Well, I planned on about an hour and a half for this meeting, so I'm
Okay,
gonna
well,
have to
Yeah,
say
we all
goodbye.
need to get on with our lives. So I'll
Okay.
see you all next time when we have SV Divya and Machinehood and the misused buzzword AI.
Okay,
Okay.
great to meet
Thank
you all.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Good to see you.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay.
Well,
Nice
Bye.
to
bye-bye.
see you all.
Oh,
Bye.
I'm not gonna quit because I have to turn off the recorder. Wait. I'm gonna cancel. Go ahead.
So long.
Oh, but I have to turn off here. Okay, stop recording.